Hello everyone. I'm so pleased to welcome you to the Agile Way of Working Club's first event for the new semester. I hope everyone is enjoying their new classes. Today, we have a very special guest who's very close to my heart, Mikko Ketokivi, Professor of Operations Management and Organization Design at IE. Although prior to his class, I had a good knowledge of the Agile concept and its uses in the tech field, Miko's class has helped me clarify many misconceptions and introduced me to other possibilities and fields where Agile could be implemented. And that's what we aim to do today, to help you understand what is Agile and what is not Agile, and give examples of its possible uses. We will start with some discussion points, and then we will open floor to your questions. So please put your questions in the chat, and we will call on your name so you can ask your question as we create them. So please welcome with me, Professor Mikko. Hi, Mikko. It's always a pleasure to
Rana. Good to see you.
It's always a pleasure to be in one of your coffee chats. We really enjoyed them, and we can't get enough.
Yeah, I decided that I'm not going to drink coffee this late, so then I thought maybe I'll have a glass of bourbon, but I'll do that afterwards. So great to see you. I recognize some of the faces. You've taken a class with me, so thanks for using a perfectly serviceable Thursday night to talk about Agile. So Rana sent me a couple of questions, and then I hope we can just have a conversation. I'll have a couple of slides, but I really want to, just like in my class where we cover these topics, I really want you to get a good grasp of the fundamentals. And by that, I don't mean basics. Nothing is basic in an MBA education, but the fundamentals. So I'll take pretty much the same approach I took in the operations management class. Okay, so
Amazing.
why don't I go ahead and share my screen?
Yes, please.
So if you do, you need to stop sharing first, or okay? So I am just going to do share portion of screen. So these are the questions that I got from you. And we thought we'd break it down into two parts. One is kind of a high-level overview. You know, what do we mean by Agile? What's the history? Why is it relevant today? Is it more relevant today than it was before? I tend to think it's always been relevant. As long as I can remember, it's been relevant. And you know, I've been at this now for a little over 20 years, and it's always been relevant. But something that's happened is something that happens mysteriously to many concepts. They kind of change their meaning over time. They kind of get hijacked by individual groups, and a lot of this is also, you know, business. You know, if you can set up a company and convince people that you are the best expert on Agile, or you have the best new angle to Agile, I mean, that means that you'll have business. So I want to keep that in mind as well, because a lot of these things are also commercial products, and you know, different commercial products that are called Agile will do different things. They will focus on different things. Okay, so if we do first kind of the more general overview and then dig deeper into, okay, so let's look at SATA, let's look at Toyota, let's look at software development, and then see. And I have a couple stories to tell as well from my own research. One example is from a healthcare project that I did, and we did it for 5 years, and I never even realized that I was actually doing Scrum. Someone told me at the end, so this is Scrum. I said, yeah, really? I had no idea. Okay. So let me start with a slide that I showed. So Noe, Rana, you're gonna recognize this. Here's a cartoonish version of myself being confused about stuff. So the things on this slide are all things that you can find in the magical world of the internet. things like lean startups, Agile Sigma, Agile Lean Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma for robust process development. So it's almost like being in a candy store. You know, people mix and match these terminologies, and these are often embedded in various, you know, software programs or consulting concepts or whatnot. And the question we asked in the class was, are these just buzzwords, or are these useful concepts? And, you know, being a scientist, I have the identity of a scientist. I always think of, if we use a concept, we should only use it in one meaning. Otherwise, we'll imagine that we had different different uses for the word temperature or speed. So Kelvin, Kelvin, that's great. So I think there was, I was channeling something there. So yeah, so suppose that we meant different things with the same concepts. I mean, we would be very confused. And I think this is what has happened with concepts such as lean, agile, Six Sigma, and robust. Okay. These are just 4 things that we discussed in my class. The biggest confusion, I think, arises from equating lean and agile, because they kind of sound the same, but I would almost argue that they're actually antithetical to one another. That if you try to implement lean and agile at the same time, you will simply end up in confusion. I mean, you may, if we think of a supply chain, some parts of the supply chain could be organized as lean and others as agile, and there are examples of that. But if you try to run the very same process applying both lean and agile principles, you will end up with very confused people, and then a system that probably does not function. Okay, so, and I want to make sure that we, you know, we cover that here as well. Okay. So let me just ask you. So the word agile, what's the first connotation that comes to mind when you think of an entity being agile? Think of an animal being agile. What comes to mind?
Reducing different types of waste.
Reducing waste.
Yes.
That sounds like lean to me more than agile.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so lean. The idea of lean, the idea of just in time, why would a company like Toyota be interested in lean, reducing waste?
Because it saves them, reduces cost.
It reduces cost, and when you have a company like Toyota, guess how much Toyota pays its suppliers for components and subsystems per year? What do you think? What do you think is the total sum of money that Toyota spends on its supply chain?
In the billions.
Tens of billions. Could be $100 billion. Okay? So, of course, and one of the things that I always invite you to think about, whether you're thinking of a startup, whether you're thinking of a mature company, whatever the context is, I always want you to think of and ask the question, what is the main problem that the organization is trying to solve? Or at least a hierarchy of problems. So I was the chairman of an industrial startup that had to build a production system, proprietary production system, which is really difficult to finance with debt, so it has to be financed with equity. So our main problem was raising equity. And raising equity in an environment where you don't know how many rounds of financing you need to do. So raising equity in an environment characterized by substantial uncertainty. Okay, so when we defined that as the main problem, that had a lot of implications then on how many founders do we want to have on board, how many shareholders do we want to have, and so on and so forth. Now, Toyota, if you think of Toyota's main problem, one problem really high on that list is how do we achieve cost efficiency when we spend to the tune of $100 billion on our supply chain? And of course, One obvious answer is let's try to keep the work in process inventory as low as possible. Hence, let's see if we can implement just in time. Let's see if we can get rid of inventories as much as we can. Some inventories are always needed, but let's see if we can keep them to a bare minimum. That would be the idea behind lean. But the lean concept to be implementable really requires a fairly stable environment. For you to be able to do just in time, you really need to have a fairly predictable environment. I mean, nothing is fully predictable, but in a comparative sense. Now, what do you suppose is the main problem that Zara faces? What would be high on the top problems that Zara as an organization needs to solve or to address?
Rotating stock.
Well, they certainly want to rotate the stock. What exactly do you mean by rotating stock? Let me make sure I understand.
Because I don't know too much about Zara, but I know they come out with new styles every 2 weeks or so. So
there you go.
Just changing the stock.
Introducing about 50,000 new items every year. I mean, that is one of the main and if you think of their business idea, that's their business idea, right? That when you go to Zara today and 2 weeks from now, you will have a different set of items there in the rack. Okay, so one of their main problems is how to deal with this kind of variety and uncertainty. So they have to be responsive. And if your objective is to be responsive, that's when Agile comes in. To be Agile, if you think of an animal that's Agile, a cat, for instance. It's able to change directions if it's chasing something. It's able to change directions and stop and go. Lean can't do that. Does anyone who took my class remember what was the animal that we designated as the kind of the epitomizing lean? I think there were two that I can think of. One was the orca whale, and the other was an elephant.
Yes, that's right.
So if you watch a video of an elephant walking, I think that really is a nice analogy for a lean system. Okay, so it keeps moving inevitably. So it doesn't do anything stupid. I mean, it's just moving. So another thing, when I lived in Helsinki there on the coast, I loved to sit in the park and watch the big boats, the cruise ships that sail between Helsinki and Stockholm to come in. There was just something really zen and soothing about watching these big hunks of metal float to the port. So again, lean, the idea that you're really eliminating waste in the sense that you don't do anything that you don't need to do. You don't monkey around with things. You know exactly what needs to be done, and therefore there is no. And the other example was the pit stop, Formula One pit stop, lean and mean. It's so lean that these people don't even have to talk to one another. Everyone knows what they are supposed to do, and they change the tires and do whatever they need to do in a matter of a couple of seconds without the need even to communicate. In fact, if communication needs to take place, something has gone wrong. So in that sense, communication is actually a form of waste in that setting. Okay, so here's the basic idea of Agile is to be responsive. And there's nothing else I can say about Agile at the general level, because everything else is going to depend on the context. Okay, so let me describe. So one context was Zara, trying to deal with product variety, trying to deal with introduction of new products, again, to the tune of 50,000 new items every year. How do you configure your supply chain? How do you make sure that your product development and your production work hand in hand? And of course, not just, it's kind of the classic triangle of, product development, supply chain, and sales and marketing. How do you make sure that those work seamlessly together? And if you can make that work, then you have an agile organization in that context. Okay. Now, has anyone ever heard of the application of agile in software development and what it means in software development? Rana?
Yes. So, as you know, I come from a tech background,
Yeah, yeah.
and Agile for us is a big concept applied across in different ways, but also even in software development, we would totally confuse the concepts that you have just mentioned. What is the difference between lean and agile? And then we
Yeah.
bring in the concept of lean startup, which even looks more like agile than lean, as you have mentioned it.
No, that's true. You know, to me, because I was in charge of a lean startup for 3 years, and lean in the context of startup means that you have no money. You
Yes.
have no money. You are hurting for cash all day, every day. So yeah, you're not going to have a lot of inventories if you don't have money to pay for it. So in that sense, but the notion of lean startup, again, is very different than the notion of lean production in the context of, let's say, the Toyota production system.
With
And
Agile,
again, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that with Agile in tech, it was revolutionary for us because it took us from the waterfall model, which is
Excellent.
just do documentation first, get it right, then start design, and then submit to the client a project maybe 1 year or 2 years later. And sometimes you got it wrong from the documentation phase,
Yeah.
and everything that you have been working on for the past 2 years was absolute waste.
Very good. You're stealing my thunder here because I had
Sorry.
no, that's okay. In software development, and this is actually something that, you know, is very similar in new product development as well. So in software development, we have something called the waterfall model. In new product development, we use some corresponding concept is the stage gate model. So when you have a project, such as a new development project, it goes through stages. So there is, you know, conceptual planning and then design, development, testing, and so on. So the idea that it proceeds fairly linearly, and the notion of gate in the stage gate model means that once you pass the gate, you don't go back. Okay? And if you think of, I mean, certainly there are probably contexts in which waterfall and stage gate work just fine. But they, again, have to be fairly stable, fairly predictable, fairly well understood environments. But what happens when that is not the case? What happens when you know that, you know, you may be betting on the wrong horse? And you can't just say, okay, once we pass that gate, we can't go back. Is there any way we could build in a more iterative system so that you can go back? Not necessarily back to the drawing board, but to say, hey, we tried this in a prototype and it simply doesn't work. We need to go back to we don't have to go back to the drawings, but we have to go back to the earlier stage in the design to see if we can fix this problem. And this is the idea of agile in the context of new product development and software development, is that, and this is the best picture I could find. There were about a dozen really horrible pictures on the internet that I thought this isn't doing justice. But see this idea of how, like, design, development, and testing are kind of taking place simultaneously. I mean, this is a kind of a clumsy depiction, but the sentiment is, I mean, this is not going back in time. That's not what's being depicted here, but the sentiment that you have to be able to think in terms of multiple phases of the project at the same time. And actually, when we discussed this in the operations management class, one of the ideas that I presented was that what if companies started thinking of developing new products or services, not in terms of projects, but in terms of processes? in terms of organizational processes that can simultaneously live in different parts of the organization, instead of being projects that are in a certain place and in a certain department at any given time. You know, also think of construction projects, for instance. So Agile in the context of software development and new product development, the notion of responsiveness, again, the basic idea of responsiveness is still there, but it's different than responsiveness in the case of Zara, responsiveness in terms of the supply chain, in terms of being able to introduce new products. Here, yeah, kind of the same idea, responsiveness, but not in terms of, what do you think, Rana and others? What do we need to be responsive for in the context of software development? Where does the need for responsiveness originate?
Go ahead, Vinay.
In software, I would think it would be around the addition of new features or updates just to keep pace with how fast the market moves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it is, I think it's ultimately about uncertainty. And I'll tell you a story in a little bit. I'll tell you what I think it means. But it is about the ability to adapt. I think adaptation is a key word, both in terms of, you know, what Zara is trying to do is trying to adapt to the business environment and to the strategy that it's trying to implement. And here in Agile software development, we're trying to adapt. We are trying to adapt to maybe something that we didn't think about or something that emerged as we saw. As you can see in this depiction, stakeholder input is being sought at different parts, not just at the end, not just pushing something on someone's table and saying, hey, what do you think of this? And then they say, well, what is this? Is it a toaster or a computer? I don't know. So, but more, you know, involve stakeholders more in the actual process.
Can I add something on top of the adaptation point? I think it's interesting in the, just like thinking about it from a evolutionary biology standpoint too.
Yeah.
I think like companies as trying to survive continuously or trying to just come out with new ways to ensure their longevity.
Very good. No, that's a very good. And I think, I don't remember if I've mentioned this in the lean coffee hour that we had about 1,000 years ago in the spring, but Toyota has struggled enormously. Toyota has struggled enormously in adaptation because the lean system and the lean enterprise is not designed to be adaptive. It's designed to be efficient. And there is a fundamental trade-off between efficiency and responsiveness. It is really difficult to be highly efficient and highly responsive. And by highly efficient, I simply mean kind of economic productivity in the general sense. There is just like if you think of the tension between, in the healthcare context, between cost of care and quality of care. There is a tension. There is a clear tension between quality of care, and we certainly saw that in the spring. And heavens above, I think we're going to see it again in the coming months when you think of how hospitals manage their ICU capacity, for instance. I mean, there are fundamental trade-offs there. I hope we're heading into the second wave, more intelligence and more experience and better able to adapt. But let's see. Let's see. It's really hard for me to be optimistic because there are so many inertial forces. It's really difficult to add capacity significantly in a short amount of time. Okay. Okay, so let me tell you a story. Let me tell you a story of a research project that I did from 2013 to 2017. There are a couple of things there I wanted to. And I'll be more than happy to share this with you if you would like to read the actual. So this was published in Journal of Operations Management, which is one of the journals, professional journals that publishes the empirical research on operations management. So here's the deal. In late 2012, I think, the city of Espoo, which is the largest suburb of the capital of Finland, Helsinki, they reached out to us, actually to my colleagues at Aalto University, which is formerly the Helsinki University of Technology. And they said, we need your help in rethinking our home care delivery system. Okay, so what is home care delivery system? If Mrs. Johnson has to move to an assisted living facility because she can't take her insulin shots in the morning and at night, everybody loses, right? Mrs. Johnson loses, her family loses, the society loses, because it is just highly unfortunate if somebody has to give up their home and move to a facility where they need to be living just because they can't manage this simple procedure. So what the city of Espoo did already 15 years ago, they designed a home care system. This is essentially a system of traveling caregivers, as they were called. Nurses, social workers, whatever expertise was required. And they would travel from home to home. About 200 nurses and traveling caregivers would go to a couple thousand homes, to some of them once a day, others twice a day, some of them maybe once a week, twice a week. Somebody would need help just getting in and out of bed. Someone would need their medication, their insulin shots. Someone would need something from the store, bathing and things like that. You know, the things that elderly people need when they can't fully take care of themselves. But they're still not as sick or incapacitated that they would need continuous care. Okay, so probably the reason they called us was because they thought, hey, these are operations research people. And indeed, you know, if does anyone know what the traveling salesman problem is? Or this traveling salesperson problem? It's kind of a classical problem in operations research. So suppose that you are a traveling salesperson and you have to travel to 10 different cities in the next week. Now the question is, in what order should you visit those 10 cities? That's a traveling salesperson problem. Okay, so, and we can see how this is really an optimization problem. How do we find a route through these 10 cities such that the total distance traveled is minimal? Okay, so we thought, okay, we got this. We got this. It is complex. It's a lot of people, but hey, we got the machinery, we got the computation power. Let's just optimize the heck out of this thing. And it didn't take us a long time to realize that, you know, this is not a traveling salesperson problem. You know, to increase, because we started realizing, you know, in whose interest is it to minimize the travel time? We kind of took it as granted that, yeah, it is about minimizing the travel time and the travel distance of an individual caregiver. But when we talked to the caregivers, they actually said, no, that's not what we're thinking about. And certainly when we talked to the customers of this, I mean, they didn't give a crap. They didn't care. They cared more about things. So suppose Mrs. Johnson needs insulin shots every morning at 8 a.m. and every night at 8 p.m. What do you think her utility function looks like? What do you think Mrs. Johnson is interested in?
The same person coming again?
Yeah, I certainly would. Or if somebody came to bathe me, I think I would like probably a male and probably the same person every time. So, okay, so their utility function looks very different. So we had kind of simply assumed that the objective function that the management gave us was the thing that needed to be optimized. Okay, so one of the things that is often discussed in the context of Agile, and we actually saw that already, was the word stakeholder. So who is the stakeholder in the context of software development? Those of you who are familiar, when we speak of the stakeholder, what are we talking about?
Maybe it's the organization who paid us, or if we're developing something proper, if, for example, we are Zoom, then everyone who is using it and affected by our product.
Yeah, so users. We kind of equate stakeholders with users. But when we thought about, okay, then this really challenged us to think about who are the stakeholders in the home care delivery system. And we came up with at least three. First of all, the citizens, the people who use the service. Secondly, the traveling caregivers. It is their job. We ought to listen to them. And then, of course, the system itself, and because it was taxpayer funded with a 10% co-payment, I think, from the users, the city of Espoo as well. Okay, so we have 3 or 4 different stakeholders. And in designing, actually, the system was already in place. We had to redesign it in a way that would make it better. I'm just going to use a very cowardly word, better, because we realized that we can't impose a single objective on the system. And that led us down to many different rabbit holes, and it took us 5 years to we finally were able to improve productivity by about 10%. And I'm fairly happy with, 10% improvement in productivity is very good. But that improvement came after many, many iterations. And after realizing that we need to get, because if we lose the credibility, if the system loses its credibility in the eyes of any of those stakeholders, it's going to collapse. So we gave up operations research. We gave up optimization. We threw all that stuff by the wayside and said, okay, let's work on this as essentially a stakeholder management problem. And then that led us to think about, how are these routes planned and who plans them? What's the role of the traveling caregiver teams? What's the role of the centralized planning system and all that? But at the end of the day, we came up with a solution that we had no idea would be the solution when we first started on the project. And then we thought, okay, this might be interesting enough to send to a journal, so we sent it. And then once this had been published, a colleague of mine, we were having a conversation, and he said, oh, I enjoyed your Scrum paper. I said, what? What paper? You won't find the word Scrum in this article. And I said, well, what are you talking about? You finally lost your mind, as I predicted you would? No, but then he said, that's what you're doing. And indeed, this is how Scrum, which is one of the tools or frameworks. And when I saw this, I said, they stole my idea. So look at this, identify an opportunity. Well, we did. And the stakeholders are here already. We first assumed that the stakeholder is the management of the system. We didn't realize that's not the exclusive stakeholder. So then from the management perspective, we thought we understood what the desired outcome was. So we framed it as a traveling salesman problem. And then we thought of different ways of organizing it. And we said, let's go with this. And then this is what I like, build at least part of it. We thought we were building the whole thing, but in reality, we were building only just part of it. And then one of the things that I really want to underscore is when, point number 2 says, understand desired outcomes. Even more crucial is understanding unintended outcomes. Whenever you tinker with a system, a non-trivial system, there's going to be a whoops moment that makes you say, okay, I didn't fully understand this. Let's pause here. Let's see why we are observing what we observed, because that's not something we expected. And this is a really, I bet this happens in software development as well. That at some point you realize, okay, that wasn't supposed to happen. Why did that happen? And then you realize, okay, I think I know what's going on here. So that's why this deploy and measure aspect, I think that one of the things that you really want to pay attention to are the unintended consequences. And I want to make a distinction between undesirable and unintended. Often when we do something, you know, you take medication for something, there may be the undesirable consequence of side effects. But usually those are known in advance. So when you design a system and you know, okay, in this system, we're going to have to trade off quality with efficiency. We're fully aware of that. So there is an undesirable outcome here. But you know that in advance. It's not going to catch you by surprise. Unintended is the thing that you did not anticipate. And when that happens, you have to go back to the design to understand what is producing that outcome. And in our case, all the unintended consequences had to do with our narrow definition of stakeholder. Once we realized that it's not just the system, but also the people who benefit from it and the people who run it, we started understanding the unintended consequences. And the project actually became more of a process of reconciliation of stakeholder issues than an attempt to align them. Because, you know, we realized that we can't align these stakeholder interests. We need to reconcile. We need to do something to reconcile. Okay. So what's the punchline here? Well, first of all, I was doing Scrum and I had no idea. But I think there's a deeper message. If you focus on the problem, and if you define what the main problem is, and if you're willing to change your mind about what the main problem is, and then if you think of what are the tools that I need, how do I need to think about this? You don't need a buzzword. You don't need to use the word agile, lean, robust. You just don't. Those are just filler words that are just, maybe they'll give you a label, but they don't advance your understanding. And that's my approach to just about any operational system or organization. I don't care what you call it. You can call it anything you want, but make sure that you understand it. And I love this graph. I really like this. And then I realized, okay, maybe I need to look into Scrum a little bit. But the idea that, you know, that we're really, many of us are talking about the same issue. Some of us use the label Scrum or Agile. Others don't use a label at all. But understanding that in this home care case, again, the key word was adaptation. Keyword was adaptation. And then something that's really difficult for human beings is paying attention to things that you did not expect to see. Because we have this, I think we are hardwired. If you're a student of psychology, you may have heard of something called confirmation bias. When we look at something, we are unconsciously looking for evidence that supports our predisposition. But unintended consequences, by definition, challenge our predisposition. So developing that skill and the idea of hypothesis testing from the Toyota case is kind of rhymes with that. We try to understand the system so well that we can predict its behavior, but lo and behold, any non-trivial system is going to surprise us. And COVID certainly has surprised us. Surprised us once, I think it's going to surprise us again. Okay. So those were my stories. I don't know if, did I address any of these questions?
Of course. You actually touched on a point that we were struggling with. People always confuse the concept of Agile or Scrum as strictly for tech, and we are in an MBA.
No. Yeah. No. Again, think in terms of the main problem. The problem of adaptation and responsiveness can be found in any context. It just takes different shapes and different tools are being used. So when things become embedded in business ideas and consulting concepts and software, then, you know, they may kind of, we may pay attention more to a specific context. But again, I want you to be students who are able to, you know, to ask the fundamental, hey, what's going on here? What is it that you're trying to do? So certainly this basic idea applies to just about anything. Is there anything that this doesn't apply to?
Yeah. And I really love that you got us examples from industry, from fashion, from research, from healthcare. And this is what people really need to understand about the concept of agility and how it can transform any business or an old business mentality and take it to, as you've said, you were able to make a 10% improvement, which is huge in this sector.
I think it is. And I think that Agile, there is something, I want to say counterintuitive, but also, you know, the human beings are, we're not just resistant to change, we're hostile to it. We're hostile to change in some sense. And Agile and the notion of adaptation really challenges that, doesn't it? The idea that you have to be able to, I mean, it's really difficult to say, okay, and I remember at least 2 or 3 meetings in the home care project where we had to say, you know what, we've been mistaken. We've been chasing the wrong rabbit here. We have to be able to, we have to go back. We have to go, not back to the drawing board. So it's not like, you know, let's just, you know, start from the scratch, but hey, let's see if, I think the verb is co-opt. When you co-opt unintended consequences, what you try to do is come up with the design that kind of captures that unintended consequence, makes it understandable, makes it intelligible. And this is what this is what scientific research is about. I mean, scientific discoveries are about that oops moment, and then being able to make sense of that oops moment and saying, okay, I think we can now understand this better. Same thing with medicine, same thing with innovation. You know, innovation often involves, you know, I don't know if you've heard the story of the Post-it note, how it was essentially invented by accident. Yeah, they were trying to, 3M was trying to develop an adhesive, and then they realized that this adhesive isn't working well enough. And then they realized, that's kind of cool that it's not working well enough, because now we can attach it to things, and then we can remove it, and it doesn't leave a mark. So it was purely accidental. Of course, when accidents happen to people like me, disaster follows. But when accidents happen to very smart engineers, you know, they're able to co-opt that. And there are many other examples where something that happened that we did not anticipate led to insight. So that I think is central.
Mikko, now you have me thinking about like how many pivots or famous pivots were the result of just unintended consequences where an opportunity was seized there. I had a question around agile versus lean, and I really liked your analogy of just framing it in terms of animals.
Yeah.
So is it correct to think of agile versus lean from what you're ultimately trying to build?
Yeah.
So like for lean, where you're looking to build with the Toyota example, you're looking to build a car. Lean makes the most sense because of the enormity of the operation. The least amount of waste is the methodology that fits, versus agile in the case of software, where you're just trying to adapt, get things out there, figure out new ways to be successful, stay relevant.
Yeah. I think that if you think of a car, a final assembly plant for an automobile. So, and I think just about any car maker tries to do this. They will try to do something called level production, which means that no matter what the final demand, customer demand for the cars is, they will try to maintain a stable production schedule. So they essentially try to turn the factory into a closed system that is so predictable that they can really take the efficiency out of it. And they can really minimize the inventories. You can never go to zero inventories, but you can go pretty darn low. And that is obviously an enormous cost saving. But it only functions in a world where, you know, this kind of level of production is possible. I don't think Zara can't really. Zara needs to have a lot of slack in its operations. It has to commit as late as possible its production capacity. So it has to keep nimble. And that's again, the main problem. The main problem there is being nimble, being able to adapt, whereas the main problem for companies like Toyota is to be efficient and eliminate waste. And waste needs to be understood in a very broad sense. So it's not just, of course, scrap. I mean, physical waste. You want quality levels to be high, but at the same time, you want, you know, inventory is a form of waste. And like the pit stop example, Formula One pit stop example shows, even communication can be waste. If two engineers spend an hour speaking on the phone, they have just allocated 2 hours of resources into talking about something. And as one of the greatest thinkers of our time, Homer Simpson, has said, the problem in organizations is communication. Way too much communication. And I think he's got it right. I think he's got it right. That communication is a commitment of resources. And if you're sitting in meetings, cross-functional team meetings, 5 hours every week, that may be construed as waste. Or at least you should think about this. Why are we doing this? Why do we have to keep devoting time to this? There could be a good reason for it, but it could also be that, you know, you're just doing it out of habit. Hey, we always have this Monday morning meeting. But no, Toyota executives would be the first to point out that this could be a form of waste. But that's a different mindset than Agile. So if you get one thing out of this conversation, the distinction between lean and Agile, I think that would be useful. Okay, now, are there other questions that I could entertain at this point?
I want to open the floor. Yeah, exactly. Go on, Lorena.
Well, thank you very much for your explanation.
Sure
Finally,
thing.
I get to understand the difference between all of these systems. Actually, I found that
Great.
It's been great. Yeah, the only doubt that I have now, and I don't know if there's like a different on when to use for example, Agile and when to use Scrum. Is there like a slight difference on in which projects to use Agile and which ones to use Scrum, or we can use them both?
Okay, that's a good question. To me, Scrum is implementation of Agile. That's how I think about it. Agile is the idea that we need to be able to adapt, and then Scrum is granted, I'm not an expert. There are better experts of Scrum at IE than I am, but my understanding is that it's simply a set of tools and principles and procedures to apply the notion of Agile in a specific setting. So what you see here is, you know, this description of this process, which we then found out that we had been using kind of in our applications. So to me, they are the same thing, but they're kind of at different levels of abstraction, if you will. Scrum is the more practical framework, and then Agile is the broader principle. But I could also see situations where maybe Scrum isn't the right way to think about Agile. Because I don't know if Zara uses Scrum or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Because to me, their main problem and their agility challenge doesn't seem to be, I don't know, I could be wrong, but I think there's a plausible hypothesis that maybe Zara doesn't use Scrum all that much. I'd be willing to not bet, not next month's rent, but my lunch money, that they are probably not as intensive in applying Scrum as others. That they have other tools better suitable for their Agile challenge than Scrum.
Okay, understand. Yes, because I see Agile more for example, product development, and also in the startup world, really, when you're trying to develop a startup solution, also there's Agile, because the whole system is Agile. So then, once you have, for example, in a startup, a solution that you think it's the right one, then you try to understand if it's really what the customers want, and then if it's not, you continue changing it.
Exactly. Yeah. We already, the word pivot was mentioned several times, and
so that's Agile.
I would think of pivot as Agile. You know, if your startup is unable to pivot, that means that you don't have the agility. Okay. And we know that startups die because they can't pivot.
Yeah, exactly.
There's actually evidence. It is the Startup Genome Project out of, I want to say, UC Berkeley and Stanford. There's actually massive research on pivoting in the high tech industry. They have really beautiful databases, and they've done analyses. And one of the unambiguous conclusions is that, you know, a startup that is unable to pivot is in a heap of trouble. And I could see how being able to pivot is a manifestation of Agile, but almost by definition.
Okay, but then if we want to implement the Scrum after doing Agile, that doesn't apply, for example, I don't know, in product development? No?
I think that product development, I think they use Scrum. There are other tools as well. You know, the product development projects that I haven't done research on product development for the past 10 years. So the last time I looked at it was in the context of healthcare and medical devices. And I don't know if Scrum even existed. It may have existed, but it was not a tool that if it existed, it was a tool that this company did not use, but they had a whole host of other tools that they used. And of course, many of these, because if you're in the medical devices, you know, all the regulations, all the laws, all the quality control. So any tool that you use, you have to take the context into account.
That's true.
And if we talk about, you know, the development of medication, for instance, not just medical devices, but medicine, the quality control and the legislation and the regulations are so profound and fundamental to the operation that you can't. Many of the things that you could do in an industrial setting, you simply can't do. Here's an example. I was working with a drug company once, and they were looking at their product development and the link between product development and then production of the drug. And they said that before, and this should be obvious, before you start producing a drug, the production system has to be 100% ready. And you can't change anything about that production system. And this engineer told me that suppose that you change one of the suppliers for one of the inactive ingredients in your pill, that launches at least a 6-month quality control process. Changing the supplier, the new supplier would be supplying the very same inactive ingredient to your pill, but it initiates a 6-month quality control process. So in that context, you really have to, you don't really learn by doing. You have to have that damn thing ready. Just like when you get on an airplane, you don't want the pilot to say, oh, we're learning here as we go, so I'll get back to you. So there are contexts in which this kind of learning by doing and learning from failure simply isn't an option.
Yeah.
Sometimes these are called high reliability organizations. I've done some work on nuclear safety, and the nuclear industry is one of those where you really don't want to, you don't want to have a lot of those oops moments or unintended consequences as you start doing things. So what's the punchline here? So much of this is so fundamentally context dependent.
Okay.
Long answer to a short question.
Yeah. Thank you. No, it's true. It depends on the context. It depends on the problem.
Always keep in mind what the context. There are no generally applicable principles. They really metamorphose into something different or something really specific. And Agile is a really good example of that. It manifests itself very differently in different contexts.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure thing.
Do we have any more questions? We are kind of running behind schedule.
I don't care. If you don't care, I don't care.
Anyone wants another question? Anyways,
it doesn't have to be about Agile. Let's see if there. I'm trying to open the chat box here. Was there anything? Okay, I don't see any questions here, but I think I got the main message through. I don't know if this is what you expected, if you're going to take my name vain as you log off, but I hope this is the start of a conversation and kind of intellectual curiosity on your part. And if you come across interesting applications of Agile in any context, let me know, because I'm also I'm interested in. When I was the editor of Journal of Operations Management, my co-editor was a former Navy SEAL. And I had really interesting discussions about, especially about Agile with him. So think of the application of Agile in a setting where people's lives are at stake. And you can see how, think of a SEAL mission, think of it, unintended, unexpected consequences, not just uncertainty, but fundamental ambiguity about what's going on. So certainly the notion of adaptation applies in that setting as well. Or imagine a bunch of firefighters entering a building that's on fire. Now think of all the ambiguity and uncertainty. Are there people inside? How many? What's happened? Where did the fire start? And at the same time, that people's lives are at stake. So when you start thinking about this and the notion of agility and adaptation, it's all over the place, just different manifestations.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing wrap up, because you made Agile very relevant to different problems and different situations that we face every day, not just there into tech. I think we get the lesson of we can really apply Agile in almost everything in our life, maybe in even cooking something or the most basic things in our life. So thank you so much for this, Mikko.
Sure thing. Well, my pleasure. And hey, let's do this again. If you want to do it again, this is fun, because I'd also like to talk about robust, because that if a system is robust, it means that it will function no matter what the circumstance. So sometimes you can actually circumvent the need for agility by having a robust design. So even though agile thinking is applicable, it doesn't mean that agility is always the answer, especially if you can come up with a design or a procedure that can somehow absorb or even ignore the uncertainty. So we can certainly have more conversations about this, and if there's anything else you'd like, or I have stuff that you could read. And those of you who didn't take my operations management class, I'm happy to send my syllabus and the materials if you'd like to take a look. So, because we did discuss these issues there as well.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Okay.
So much. That's very generous.
Okay, so Rana, why don't you act as the liaison here, and if there's anything that you need, just reach out, and I will make
I'll
stuff
definitely
available.
do.
Okay, very good. Well,
thank you so much, Mikko.
You bet. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Just a second before everyone logs off. Vinay has an announcement to make for the upcoming events of our club. So.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Rana, and thanks again, Mikko. It's very generous of you.
Sure thing.
Content.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Absolutely.
So, in the spirit of being adaptable, what we're trying to set up with the Agile Club over the next few months is to kind of cater the certifications we offer to what we see demand on both the employer side and our community side. So the first immediate one, and there'll be more communications to come in the next couple of days. We're starting out with the basic Scrum Foundation certification for first week of October. I'll confirm through an email as well. I believe it's going to be October 10th. And then on top of that, we're going to be polling our community members, people interested in following career paths that will touch Agile methodologies, as well as through the Technology and Innovation Club. I know they're running a Six Sigma course in early November as well. So we're going to work together to make sure we're communicating what's available for those of you looking to upskill, add certifications to help you as you enter the job market. So just stay tuned for that. But the two that are confirmed and that are happening in the next little while are the Scrum Foundation course, beginning of October, and then the Lean Six Sigma Green Belt course, which will happen first week in November. And then there'll be more to come from the two clubs as well.
Great, that's great news.
Awesome. And if you do have questions about what's happening, we'll start being more active in the WhatsApp group, in the campus groups forum and that. So we hope to keep this conversation going, and hope to have Mikko back to share some more insight on what he's learned, and to teach us a bit more about robust, because I think there was a conversation headed in an interesting direction there as well. So be a pleasure to have you back, Mikko.
Yeah, no, just let me know. Just let me know if you can give me 2 weeks advance notice. I'm not that agile. Once you get to be my age, you slow down a little bit. But if you give me 2 weeks to prepare, then that'll be sufficient. Okay. Lean, that was gone a long time ago.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
And as we
All right.
tell us, stay robust, everyone, and see you soon.
Very good.
Thank you, Mikko.
You bet. You bet.
Thanks. Take care.